arts. This week, Dali. Salvador Dali is the showman of 20th century art. He was born with a very mischievous sense of humour. He's really honed our understanding of the absurd, showing us that anything's possible. And he brought to life extraordinary dream worlds in his vivid surrealist paintings. We all know what surrealism means. It's something that conjures a sense of the bizarre and the unexpected, or the irrational. But the fact that we do is entirely thanks to Dali, who brought surrealism into the mainstream. But with his eccentric appearance and absurd antics, many just dismiss him as a clown, a celebrity-hungry self-publicist. So was the art he created really that important? And has it changed the world we live in? If you mention Dali's name today, most people think of, well, they think of a big moustache and melting clocks. And I reckon that the persistence of memory is Dali's most popular painting. This is reproduced and parodied everywhere. The actual painting is in New York, at the Museum of Modern Art. So that's where I'm heading first. And here it is. Now, don't be fooled by its size. This is 10 by 14 inches of Dali dynamite, exploding with ideas about time, dreams, and our most intimate fantasies and fears. Nearly 80 years after it was painted, there's something that still haunts us about this picture. It has the strange, airless quality of a dream, but one that's quite unsettling, that you never forget. It's as if Dali has taken our intangible anxieties about time passing and mortality and crystallized them in paint. What is it that makes it so compelling? Perhaps it's because Dali paints impossible worlds in a very realistic way. They feel real, and in a sense, they are. Because Dali's landscapes are based on a place that he loved, the dramatic coastline of the northeast corner of Spain. Dali was born 30 miles inland from here in 1904. His father, a wealthy lawyer, was a strict disciplinarian, while his mother spoilt him, and it was Felipa who first encouraged Dali's art. His childhood memories, dreams and desires seared themselves onto his mind so much that arguably they saturate almost every painting he later made. Dali once said, "I have been made in these rocks. Here have I shaped my personality. I cannot separate myself from this sky, this sea, these rocks." Nestling in this rocky coastline is the town of Cadaqués. The Dali family used to spend their holidays here, and it's where I'm meeting Dali's biographer, Ian Gibson.
And he fell utterly, totally and madly in love with the place, and I can understand why, because it's quite magical.
Tell me about Dali's family.
Well, he had a terrific family. I mean, this photograph, which was taken more or less here, and this is Dali sitting there, probably be 5 or 6 years old.
I love the fact that he's positioned himself right in the middle of this early stage.
So you always have to be at the centre of things.
How important is it to understand this place in terms of his later art?
It's absolutely vital. I mean, all the early drawings, the early paintings, the church figures, and I don't know how many of. And I would say everything here, the people, the houses, the architecture, the boats. And without Cadaqués, there is no Dali. It's as straightforward as that. I think really he identifies totally with this landscape.
Dali's childhood paintings of Cadaqués show his incredible natural talent. He made this one when he was just 15.
You know, he could draw from the day he was born. He just had it in the blood. I suppose that's why he thought very early on he was a genius.
And did everyone else?
He could do it. And everybody said, he can do it. When he paints a duck, it's a duck. When it's a swan, his mother said, as he scratched off the paint on a table in Figueras. He just was born with this gift.
It's hard to believe from his gentle, sun-drenched teenage paintings that Dali actually had a troubled, anxious childhood. This is the church. It was only in later years that these anxieties would be reflected in his work. This screen is stunning.
It's stunning.
It must have influenced Dali as a boy, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, you couldn't but be mesmerised by this altarpiece.
Lots of Dali's later paintings, his surreal masterpieces, they're really very disturbing, quite unsettling. There's a darker side to Dali which starts to emerge here as well, right?
Absolutely, there is a darker side. And those empty beaches with hardly anybody there, or distant figures, always alone. And I think he was terribly lonely. And anxious and very, very timid. And then there's the anxiety about his mother. He is very close to his mother, but his mother is not very well, and eventually she dies when he's still very young. And that's a terrible loss. Then he's left alone. He has to face his father, and his father is a very violent figure. And Dali is frightened of his father. He admires him, he'd like to be like him, but he's frightened of him.
When he was 18, Dali moved to Madrid to study fine art. Here, he began to overcome his extreme shyness by developing a new, eccentric persona. He began to wear dandyish outfits and grew what would eventually become his famous moustache. His student art displayed outstanding technical ability, and Dali certainly knew it. His shyness was transformed into unbridled self-belief. He was actually expelled for making the outrageous statement that none of his teachers was good enough to examine his work. Going to Madrid was the first step in the young Salvador becoming Dali. Dali was in his early 20s when he first heard about a group of experimental artists in Paris who were creating strange, fantastical work. So strange, in fact, that a new word had to be invented to describe their art: surreal. Discovering surrealism would change Dali's life. What was surrealism? Well, it started out as a literary and artistic movement that was launched by this man, who is the French poet André Breton, in 1924. And it began really as a revolutionary response to the devastations of the First World War, and also it was inspired by the psychoanalytical theories of the great Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that all of us have got this inner unconscious world in which our emotional and sexual feelings are repressed, and that the only way to express ourselves is to release these emotions, but without censoring what comes out. And the surrealists were fascinated by the bizarre, quickly decided that they needed to explore this new forbidden landscape of the unconscious mind. Someone like Giorgio de Chirico created strange and haunting landscapes in which these odd, oversized objects that really don't belong together dominate the canvas. A little bit later, the Belgian artist René Magritte started painting conventional, bowler-hatted businessmen pouring out the sky. Putting it all up together, suddenly you realise why the young Dali instinctively knew that surrealism was the artistic movement for him. He could express himself with impunity and put onto the canvas all of his inner desires, fears, obsessions and anxieties. Like here, in one of his earliest surrealist paintings, Honey is Sweeter Than Blood. The barren shore of Cadaqués is scattered with strange objects that represent his childhood and adult anxieties. Inspired by Freud's ideas, he's liberating his unconscious obsessions through his art. Death and sex were clearly on the 23-year-old Dali's mind. To extract these strange visions from his deepest psyche, Dali developed a technique that he called the paranoid critical method, based on Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytical theories. I haven't a clue what Dali meant by this, so I'm on my way to meet psychoanalyst Darian Leader in the hope he can explain.